He went to Sweden with his girlfriend. This was like the trip to introduce her to Sweden and see if she would like it enough that they could move there together.
Yeah.
And so every night I have been paying witches and I've been praying that she would not enjoy it so that our baby boy Aiden would not be able to go to Sweden. And then I message him when he's there. He sends me pictures of parks and strollers and green fields and grass. And she goes, she loves it. I love it. And I was like, well, we lost him. This is our last hope to keep Aiden in the great country of America on the beautiful. I sent him pictures of the 405 to try and keep him here.
You did? Dude, he did send me a photo of the just back-to-back traffic on the 405. And it's like,
I
don't
tried
you miss
my
it?
best to like show him the beauty of America.
I mean, have you ever thought about the fact that there is
Audio listeners,
it looks like racism is frowned upon harshly.
Doug is Googling the cons of living in Sweden.
The cons of living in Sweden is that racism is frowned upon.
I'm just going off the list, man. Police are useless except with regard to prosecuting crimes.
Well,
wait, that's wait,
what you went
Like parking fines.
Tell us about Sweden,
How'd it go?
Aiden.
Okay, I'm not here to tell you about, my trip specifically, but
Okay.
there was something really, really interesting I learned while I was there. Like Atriarch said, the intention of this trip was I was bringing my girlfriend there for the first time to introduce her to Stockholm, surrounding like towns, and my friends there to give her a better idea of, are you ready to move here? Because that's my plan currently. Gonna move there in like a year and a half. Through the week we spend, we hang out with a bunch of different people. We know like Virtual, Anna Cramling, some other personal friends of mine. So I'm lucky enough to like know and have a lot of friends there already. And that's part of the reason why I want to move. While we're there, we're asking them all these different questions about, the specifics of, what do you like? What don't you like? What are the good and bad things about living in Sweden? I think when you're raised in America, you have this general idea that even if you reflect on like quality of life in Europe positively, you have this idea that they have way higher taxes. And so you have way less money. But the trade-off is you get a bunch of benefits in society, right? Sure. You pay the taxes and you get a healthcare and a welfare system and all these lovely things from it. But when I was talking to a good friend of mine who just got an entry-level software engineering position at a bank there, and we were talking about his salary and what his expenses are, I was starting to do a bit of mental math in my head. And I was like, wait a second. Have you ever had this thought is like European people you work with, they always seem to be on vacation. They always seem to be out of the office. And I kind of wondered if people in Europe have way lower like incomes or like way less disposable income because of all the tax they pay. How do they go on all these nice trips all the time? How do they get to go out and do all these lovely things on their vacation or like, do things like that? I went through and I mathed out what salaries would be like in Sweden versus Los Angeles and a bunch of other American cities when you consider all of the committed, like required to live expenses that you have in the US to see what your actual like after tax and required expenses, like money you have left is. So where I started was I just took my friend's salary who has this job. He makes about 61,000 US a year right now, which is on the higher end in Sweden. So the way I went about this is the expenses that I considered like required to live are your health insurance, your car insurance, your rent/mortgage, your utilities, your groceries, internet, phone, gas, public transportation. These are the considered expenses that I considered like required for living, right? And I just compared it to living in Los Angeles. And so after tax, if you look at this salary of $61,300 and look at it after tax in Stockholm, it's about $47,200. And then the same thing in Los Angeles, after tax, it's about $49,400. And then you...
Sorry, Atriarch is adding in an expense you missed, which is a Cybertruck.
You're gonna
which
need
costs $120,000.
That's a
Did you add that in? This is America.
That's going to make it negative.
Do you know in Sweden, the government just gives you a Cybertruck?
It's free there.
The way I estimated these was basically making the required expenses about as minimal as possible. Like considering lower end studio apartment, base utilities, not anything above what you need, like lowest end health insurance plan that you could get reasonably. That's how I generally estimated these expenses. If you consider all these things, when you look at this same salary in these same two places, your after tax and after expenses income in Sweden, in Stockholm, is $27,600, which is much higher than the $14,300 that you're left over with in Los Angeles on the same salary. And I found this immediately frustrating because it feels counterintuitive to this narrative that I've been fed my whole life. But I wanted to have an honest approach to this whole conversation.
the salaries are
because
higher
of course,
in
the
LA.
same job would have a higher salary in Los Angeles. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon.
I just wanted to bring that up because you're not mentioning
Thank
the
you.
salary would be higher.
And if you look at this position, if you entry level software engineer in Los Angeles at a bank, he's looking at probably $90,000 a year starting point, maybe $95,000. And if you run the same thing, consider all the same expenses because base required expenses are going to be the same in this situation no matter what. He's left with a higher amount, $5,000 higher in disposable income than the person in Stockholm.
If it was 50 cents more, it'd be worth it.
With 33 with $33,800 about, right? So a $5,000 difference. Okay, fair enough. You do have a higher take-home income on this similar job in between these two places, right? So I have my thoughts on that to begin with.
Okay.
But I decided I wanted to take a look at, well, what happens when you just look at median income in these places or per capita income? It depends on what you're looking for. You can use a bunch of different numbers for these things. I tried to be as neutral as possible in what I chose. And I have a bunch of different options here. But when you look at median income or median personal income in Stockholm, it's about $43,000 US for the year. If we go through the same, math that I laid out, you're left over with about $18,000 of disposable income for the year, right? Considering all the same expenses. This number is a little high, I think, but we could say the median Los Angeles income is 72. I think there's some discrepancies here. But let's take a higher median income number that I came up with, which was 72. You're left over with not much more than the 18,000. You have $21,000 left over after all those expenses, right? And then if you take a lower median income measurement in Los Angeles, which is like $60,000, you're left over with a much lower amount. And then if you look at median or like per capita income in Houston, in Nashville, where it's $45,000 and $47,000, the number you're left over with compared to the median income in Stockholm is $14,600 you're left over with, or $12,700 you're left over with. And all of the expenses for those cities, I tried to estimate specifically to those cities, to be clear. Right. I wasn't like rolling over the Los Angeles numbers to each one of those. My broader point that I want to make here is that I found this incredibly sad and frustrating because the quality of life for what you get, even if in the best case scenario where you have the same job and you're making a little more money, like say $5,000 more over the course of the year, in this example with the software engineering, is that you live in a place where you have higher rates of crime, including higher rates of violent crime, significantly more. Sweden, among Europe, one of the higher rates of gun crime in all of Europe, still considerably lower than what goes on in the United States. You have lower societal trust, more expensive education, poor public spaces in like things like parks, bad public transportation, no sick days, no parental leave, of which you get 400 days combined between you and your spouse that you get to use over the first 4 years of your child's
presentation he gave his girlfriend on the plane.
Sick. You get paid sick days if your kids are sick. You can take a week off from work, and then past that, if you get like a doctor's note that your kid is still sick, you get to stay home, paid for by the government. 25 days of mandated vacation per year minimum, paid for. You get to live in a walkable city. You have stronger public welfare. You have public health care. You have a lower life expectancy in the US. You have worse childcare, higher child mortality, higher costs of the healthcare itself with worse outcomes, better food and nutritional standards, and a higher quality of public education for your kids. You have all of those things, and maybe in some of the situations I laid out, sometimes you make less money. Sometimes. And if you take just median income, if you take the general median income from both places, you actually have more disposable income in Stockholm. And you get all of those things. As I dug into this, I felt kind of betrayed because to me, growing up, there was always this idea that like you only got all of these benefits with the fact that you paid more in tax and that you had more income for yourself. But for the average person, that doesn't even hold true. In most cases in the US, the average person on an average salary or an average paying job ends up with less money than you do in a place like Sweden. And then even on the high end, if you're someone who is striving to become a billionaire, there are more billionaires per capita in Sweden, over double that of in the US. I think it's almost 3 billionaires per million in Sweden, and in the US it's 1. So if you really cared about becoming a billionaire, you have a better shot in Sweden. To spend a whole week there walking around in a city that is significantly cleaner, at all of these immaculate parks, finding out that I get paid leave from the company that I would own in that country by the government when I want to take paternal leave. I always thought that the paternal leave didn't make any sense for me because, if I set up my company, I thought it was a legal requirement for the company to have to pay for my paternal leave. Sure. That's what I thought. It's not that. The government pays for your paternal leave. So even though I own my company, the government will send me money to take my paternal leave.
Based on your salary?
Based on the salary that I pay myself.
I assume that the corporate tax rate is higher though, right? For that company?
Theoretically, could I start a company right before I'm about to have a kid, and pay myself a salary of $900,000 a year, have the kid, the government pays that salary while I'm on paternal leave.
This is why you want to move to Sweden. You sneaky motherfucker.
So interestingly enough, corporate tax rate in Sweden is actually slightly lower than in the US. 20.6%. This is the other thing. As I'm talking to my friends there.
Wait, hold on. They lowered it this year from 32%. They did a big, beautiful bill too.
But even when they had theirs higher, right?
It was 32% until this year.
It was lower than our previous rate of 35.
Yeah.
So that part aside, Sweden, extraordinarily business friendly. If you set up a business there, there's all of these things that encourage you to do so over surrounding countries. It's a big part of the reason why so many of the large companies in not only the Nordics, but Europe are set in Sweden or Stockholm specifically because of all the benefits that they have for business owners there. And a lot of the people that I talked to there who are business owners were explaining to me the ways that you basically pay yourself and handle your taxes in Sweden as best as possible. And I was like, this situation is better for me, I think, than it is in California. And I was surprised by that because I'm a high income earner. So
Sure.
all of these things and like stereotypes perpetuated about what you sacrifice by moving to a country like that, which is one of the first questions people ask me is, well, aren't you going to pay a bunch more in taxes? Isn't that going to suck? And I was already on board because I was like, no, I'm buying into a society that takes better care of me, my family, and all of the people around me. But then financially, I'm basically in the same place I am in California, if not better. And for my kids, probably better, like if they're just going to pursue normal careers. And I'm not going to say there's no trade-off. I do think there's unique career opportunities in the United States that I don't think exist there sometimes. But I think for the average person, this whole like debacle and rabbit hole of me going into this I felt very betrayed. It made me angry that this is the case.
Give H-Rock and I a second to defend America.
Yeah.
What do we got?
I was going to say freedom. Freedom was a big one, but I think he's got a good counter to that.
Money. We have more money. No, he mentioned us billionaires.
That one. We were going to talk about trucks. They barely have any trucks in Sweden.
Do you bring up trucks at all?
He didn't even include car payment in Sweden for this because they don't have a car, I guess.
Because you don't need a car.
Wait, hold on. Are you assuming no car for people in Sweden?
Yeah, in Stockholm, because you don't need a car.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I think and to be fair, like I think there are cities, of course, there are cities in the US, like if you lived in New York or even when I lived in Seattle in college, right? Like I didn't need a car, but I think in general, in American life and in a city like LA, a car is a required expense. You do not have the same degree of choice over owning a vehicle in a place like Los Angeles as you do in a place like Stockholm.
Okay, so help me understand something. Everything you're saying makes sense, but when you compared a software engineer in Sweden versus a software engineer here and said they would make more here because salaries are higher, the take home was $5,000 higher.
Yes.
So
yes.
My understanding from this is like if you are a high earner, you do take more in the end from being in America. So I get what you're saying about this system supporting people who make, let's say, the median or less in America, and that makes sense.
I think
but what you just said of like you felt like you were told you're gonna have to pay so much. You are a high income earner. So won't you be paying substantially more in Sweden?
So yes, with an asterisk.
Okay.
From my understanding, if you're a business owner specifically, and that's how I would be applying for my visa, I might be in a unique position where I might be paying similar or less tax than I do now, because of the way that you distribute profits from your business and the way business profit is taxed there versus a normal salary. But I just treated this as salary to salary.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Salary to salary, you would get more take home in America, right? Like if you're a very high income earner, right? It
yes.
feels
so like
like
I have an example. I think I
for
did
the average
it. Oh, I wrote it
high-income
down. Like
earner,
if you,
it sounds like there is
So if
there's a reason why they might be like, no, I should stay in America.
So if I made as an example, right? I totally concede.
So that's our defense. Rich people win.
I totally
Rich.
concede that. I totally concede. Well, rich people who are paid salaries but don't own companies. Yes.
Point for America.
So, like the example that I did, I don't have it on the sheet, which was if you made a salary of $450,000 a year, your take home in Sweden on that salary in Stockholm specifically is about $236,000 US a year. That's what your take home would be. And then in California, your take home would be $269,000 a year. So about a $33,000 difference. Pretty significant, honestly. But I think the two main points I want to make here is that even though that difference exists, right? You have all of these things and benefits that you sacrifice for not only yourself, but your kids, your family, and your community around you. Is it worth that salary difference to walk through the streets of a place that has a ton of people who are homeless everywhere and like don't have homes and like you don't have access to healthcare, and your kids have to go to an expensive private school instead of a public school, and like all of those? Like, is it worth all of that trade-off, or should you just be buying into a collective benefit for society around you? Like, I would argue that the trade-off there to begin with is bad. But the thing I wanted to stress is that for the median income earner, for the average person with the average job, you walk away with more money in Sweden still. And that's crazy because those people are giving up nothing. They actually have more money than the American does. And then you also get all these benefits. And I think that runs very counterintuitive to everything we're told about these systems and what Europe has over the US and these common like US versus Europe arguments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
If I were to give you an example for my girlfriend who makes a very normal salary in comparison for her job, she would make slightly more money there. And then if we had a child, she would have 200 days paid of maternity leave.
She would miss American Idol, though, I think, among other things. No, I think
she wants to stay her entire life in a country that's never won the World Series.
The shame, the embarrassment.
Unbelievable.
We didn't even win the last baseball international tournament either.
Was
won
it called
the
the World
World
Series? It's called the World Series, Aiden.
Jesus Christ.
And I'm talking about the baseball World Cup.
I know, and we're talking
about the World
Series.
The World Series. The World Series.
That's where the world plays.
Dude, when the Grateful Dead does a world tour, you think they go to Sweden? No.
Probably.
They go to Britain and they go to
do.
America and they go to
probably
Canada.
Probably do.